Hello, 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 friends. Nicholas here with DIVO-Ted Talks, DIVOted Talks. And I debated if I would talk about this or not, but once I hit play or record and then it starts, I just roll with it. And I kept thinking about a lot of the world today, and some thoughts I had yesterday while I was in the shower. That's when I tend to have lots of thoughts and ideas and growth. But I was thinking about, the current state of things and how challenging it is to show up in it because it seems like we're all living on different planets or different countries or different islands all at the same time. And that when we're talking about things, excuse me, we're not talking about the same thing. And to the point now that sometimes I feel gaslit and I feel crazy because these people are so sure and they don't let up about their perspective that is in direct opposition to most things that I have learned or most things that I have experienced in life. And they are just sure of it. And I, really sat there and thought about it. And I was like, if I had been raised, I live in North Carolina now, if I had been raised in the mountains of North Carolina and I heard a lot of the hogwash that goes around, especially from the religious folk, especially from evangelicals, and I'm not saying that the evangelicals are bad. I'm just saying if I heard the talk, especially in the mountains of North Carolina, and I'm not talking about all the mountains, but there's a certain group, and I know that many of you are aware of who they are, that, and sometimes the Baptists, but the way that they approach the Bible seems to neglect a lot of the other lessons, in that I often see some of these people going to other countries and serving other people in, other countries as if, they're doing good, and they are, but it makes them feel good, but then they don't do it here. They'll turn their back on the poor person locally or the poor children locally as if they didn't or couldn't pull themselves up by the bootstraps. Because in addition to believing in the gospel that has been preached to them by their particular denomination or preacher or whatever, they they believe in the American dream. And so the only reason people aren't successful in the United States right now is because of some lack of character or inability to pull themselves up by the bootstraps. And that, there's an example of that one person who did it. See, it can be done. And it's just a lack of desire. And it brings me back to the last podcast episode where I was so convinced that all you had to do was show up, and if you grind every day, you'll find success. And that doesn't actually hold space for circumstances that can't be helped in any way, shape, or form. What about a kid whose parents died young and they grew up in the foster system and they had to learn to survive in a chaotic, unpredictable world? And then all of a sudden they're supposed to be able to do well in school and understand the world and take all the lessons and be able to show up in a way that takes them out of poverty or takes them out of potentially crime or whatever groups they may find themselves in. I mean, to expect that is to completely acknowledge that, to completely disenfranchise, that life experience. It's crazy. Sorry, I got a little mixed up in there. But they can look at somebody in another country that they label as a third world country, and that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. But if they live here, why haven't they done anything with their life? I don't know. What have you done with your life? And how were you able to do it? Right? It's this whole dissonance that keeps driving me crazy. And I know that I called out a very, very specific group, and I'm not saying that they are bad. I'm acknowledging the fact that there's a certain way that they talk about things. And if I heard that my whole life, I'd probably feel the same way too. And I began to have empathy And I began to, sorry, something popped up on my computer and it distracted me. But I began to have empathy in a way that was, deeply profound. And I actually was moved to tears. And I actually prayed, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." And I, in that, was able to forgive them. But that doesn't mean I have to shut up about what it is they're saying and doing. It doesn't mean I have to change my stance on it. It doesn't mean I have to be quiet about it. It just means that I was able to forgive them in that moment through this context of they are products of their environment, just like the people that they judge that are products of their environment. But one phrase that you hear all the time here, and in the South in general, "My mama raised me right. I was raised right. I was raised right," all the time. Who decides what is raised right? Like, that's how the whole US MAGA movement was started, right? There's this idea without any actual, concrete existence that they're imagining. And each of them can imagine it themselves, right? Like, raised right. Somebody in a trailer park, I've heard say that, and in a very impoverished area, just as much as I've heard, more wealthy Southern people. And so I don't think they were raised the same. I don't think they were instilled with the same values or understanding of the world. And yet they say the same thing, kind of like MAGA. What is making America great again? And each of them takes it up in their own arms as to how they want to do it. And I'm not trying to be political here. I'm just trying to throw context on they know not what they do. And one of my challenges in life is I know so much about what I do. I pay too much attention to what I do. I am acutely aware of my actions, the way I'm showing up. Well, the way I'm feeling when I'm showing up. I don't always know how I'm showing up. And the fact that, I have to do better, I have to do more, I have to. And so sometimes I can see so clearly what's going on. And then I listen to these people talk about things in ways that I'm like, what? That's what you took away from that speech? Oh, you think he makes sense, but the last president didn't? Or the two presidents before that who didn't make sense and who was divisive and blah, blah. Like, it just doesn't make sense. And, they're like, we're making foods better. And I'm like, since when? Saying something doesn't make it real, but in some people's world, because they're imagining their world around them. And we'll talk about that in the next podcast episode or a later one. I'll have to take a break, so we'll see if I remember. But many of these people have, as a protective mechanism, imagined their world around them because the reality of who they are is too painful. And I would say that is very ubiquitously applicable across everyone. Me too. But I think that's why we're so dissonant, because our imaginal, our protective barrier is different based on where we were raised, who we know, what our life experiences were. But everybody, at the end of the day, wants to be a good person, right? Even if they're not, even if they're doing what they have to do to survive, everybody except for psychopaths or sociopaths, I would say. Or terrorists, but I would say they might be sociopaths or psychopaths. Wants to be a good person, wants to be known as a good person, wants to feel like a good person. And so how do you feel today? Be well, be free.